So now let's take a look at the teams. In order to truly understand what teams you're going to be able to make with her, we have to understand how her burst works and how elemental application works. If you didn't watch my Ayato pre-release analysis and you're not quite familiar with how internal cooldown works, I would highly recommend going to watch that. I'm going to try to make it easy to understand if you haven't watched it, but it's definitely going to help. The initial burst deals hydro damage, and then coordinated attacks also deal hydro damage. Whether this shares ICD with this or not, you're always going to get one hydro application from the initial hit and one hydro application from the exquisite throw hit, the coordinated attack hit, because you're getting 4 attacks in a row, which would meet the 3-hit rule, which you can learn about in my last video. She's going to get compared to Xingqiu a lot because of this, because it is very similar. They both have coordinated attacks, but Xingqiu's hydro application is a lot better. The main reason for Xingqiu's hydro application being better is that not only do his swords apply hydro, but also when you use Xingqiu's E or burst, you get rain swords around you, and these orbitals also apply hydro on contact. Which means if you accidentally remove the hydro aura, because you can apply hydro both with your burst swords and your contact swords, it's going to be relatively easy to put that hydro aura back on the enemy. Characters that only have one source of hydro, so let's now look at how someone like Barbara, without using her E, would do. Your first attack is going to remove that pyro, but then you're not reapplying hydro until your 4th attack. In Yelan's case, it's going to be until the next wave. Now, the problem can come in if you're applying pyro very often. So for example, if you're using Hutao charge attacks, if you accidentally apply pyro, you do a normal attack charge attack with Hutao, it removes the pyro, but your charge attack reapplies pyro, and then you just do the same thing. And you're stuck in a loop where you can't reapply hydro unless you just stop charge attacking on your Hutao. Because Xingqiu's orbitals reapply hydro, then on Xingqiu, it's not nearly as big of a deal. Now, let's take a look at how elemental gauge works, and more specifically, how it's going to interact with this. While we're working there, we can explain the basic premise of it. Characters apply a different amount of element. So just because 2 different attacks both deal pyro damage doesn't mean they're both going to apply the same amount of pyro. Let's take a look at how long the hydro aura stays on the enemy. So let's just stun him real quick. So starts at around 58 seconds. Let's take a look at when it disappears. So this is about 9 point something seconds. Whereas if you use his tap E, like this, right, we did it at around 18 seconds. Let's take a look at when it's going to disappear. We take a look at this. There we go. A little bit over 9 seconds for the first one, and about 12 seconds for the second one. Child's E, when you activate it, applies 2 units of hydro, whereas Child's charge shots apply 1 unit of hydro. Now, just how long it lasts doesn't really matter that much. However, it's not just how long it lasts. If we use a charge shot on Child, swap to Bennett and use his hold E, 1, 2, 3. The 3rd hit applied pyro, it did not vaporize. Let's try to stun him again. And then this time apply 2 units of hydro. The 3rd hit got a vaporize as well. Applying more element means you'll be able to trigger more reactions. And that's what you want, right? That's obviously what you want. A little while ago, there was a leak that said that Yelan's hydro application was not 1 unit or 2 units, but was somewhere in the middle at around 1.5 units. 1.5 units would have been able to trigger 3 vaporized reactions, whereas 1 unit is only able to do 2. However, they changed that and changed her elemental application to 1 unit instead of 1.5, which means that you will only be able to trigger 2 reactions per hydro application. Now, that's very relevant because most pyro characters want to trigger a lot of reactions, right? So if we take a look, for example, at Hutao, this is going to be enough to vape the first charge attack, the first normal attack and charge attack. But we also get the Blood Blossom. The Blood Blossom will also apply pyro and potentially trigger a reaction. The problem that can arise here is that our normal attack can apply pyro, our charge attack can apply pyro, And our Blood Blossom can also apply Pyro. And if these 3 hit in between 2 Yelan waves in a row, which is very possible, basically the ICD of your normal attack lines up with when your Blood Blossom happens, you'll get 3 Pyro applications in a row, which means you're gonna start having a Pyro aura on the enemy, and it's then gonna be impossible for your Hutao to actually trigger Vaporize. Your Yelan is going to be the one that's getting the Vaporizes, which is not what you want. Even not looking at the Blood Blossom, if you've got other reactions that get triggered, for example, if you go on an Electro Charge with Pyro, Electro Charge weakens the Hydro Aura. If you go double Geo with Hydro, Crystallize weakens the Hydro Aura, and it makes it a lot harder to keep the Hydro Aura on the enemy. And because while Yelan is off field, her only source of Hydro application is these waves. If you ever lose your Hydro Aura, you're likely not gonna get it back. What you would basically need to do is you would need, if there's a Pyro Aura on the enemy, you need to have 2 Hydro applications in a row without any Pyro. Because you have to remove that Pyro with a Vaporize with Hydro, and then you have to reapply Hydro before Pyro, which is very difficult to do. Conclusion from this is that I don't expect Yelan to be a particularly good support for Hutao in double Geo teams or Taser teams where it's difficult to keep the Hydro Aura consistently. I would expect Yelan to be good in Hutao teams exclusively for VV Vape and potentially some Freeze Call. That being said, we might also see the rise of a double Hydro Hutao call where you would use Hutao normally, but then on top of that, you would also be using Xingqiu and Yelan, so you'd have even more Hydro application. You would never run the risk of missing a Vaporize. And because both Hydro and Yelan deal a lot of damage, and they both generate Hydro energy, they help battery each other, so that's going to lower their ER requirements. And then you can have as your last unit something like Fischl or something like Zhongli, and because you have a lot of Hydro application, it's not going to fuck with your reactions. Let's look through the teams where I expect Yelan to be good. First one, and the most obvious one, will be the Hutao team. It's pretty clear to me that they intend her to be a Hutao support. If you look at her constellations, her constellation 2 helps with her Hydro application, which basically lets her be solo Hydro, like relatively consistently without really ever needing Xingqiu. And her C4 gives an HP bonus to the rest of her team. Those are things that are very clearly, to me at least, tailored towards being a Hutao support. Like I said, though, I don't think she's always going to be better than Xingqiu. I think there's going to be situations where she isn't, but I would expect her to at least work relatively consistently in some Hutao teams, namely VV Vape. Shenyan and Toma can both apply Pyro if you use Shenyan's skill or Toma's burst, so you don't want to do that. So it would have to be Amber or Yanfei as your other Pyro unit. I guess Klee if you have C2 Klee. You can also go Hutao double Hydro. Probably Freeze as well, but I don't think Freeze Melt Hutao or Vape Melt Hutao is all that good, so we're probably not going to include it. What else? Yoimiya should probably be pretty good with her. Probably not Klee that well, but Diluc, Yanfei, Yoimiya should probably work pretty well. Let's just do Pyro Vape carry other than Hutao. I don't know how well it'll work with Xiangling. Like we said, if you ever lose the Hydro app, you won't be able to put it back, which means that it forces you to never use Bennett E while Xiangling Burst is active, which I'm not a huge fan of. You also might not actually be able to keep Yelan's Burst going long enough to actually vape all of the Pyronado. Like, you'd have to use them like really quickly one after the other, which means you lose one Bennett pre-funnel. I don't know. I think it's gonna work, but probably not be better than Xingqiu. I think you'll probably have a similar result in Raiden National, where you're gonna lose out on a bunch of vapes if you run her instead of Xingqiu, where you're just gonna get overload instead of vape plus overload on your enemies. In Sunfire, I think it's gonna be right? Again, you're gonna lose a lot of vapes on your swirls because you're just not applying Hydro fast enough. It should still obviously function, but I don't think I'll include it here. Let's get into the more dank stuff. Freeze, I think Freeze is gonna work. I think it's gonna be good. Her Hydro application is like more than fast enough for Freeze, so it should still definitely be fine. Mono Hydro, I'll put it down. I think Mono Hydro is like It's not really Mono Hydro that works. It's more like double Hydro, double Geo, or double Hydro, double like one Geo, one Animo, things like that. But you can actually get away with something like Kokomi or Ayato on field with Yelan, Albedo, Zhongli. They're not teams that are quite as strong, but their comfort often more than makes up for it. I don't think she's going to be like better than Xingqiu in those teams. She's probably going to be very similar. We're gonna have Taser teams, obviously, which are gonna be very good. Not only can you use her potentially as a replacement for Xingqiu, but I think Taser team is another one of the teams where you can use both of them together very well. If you look at the Sucrose, the initial Sucrose Taser team, it has a pretty good balance of AoE and single target damage. But if you find yourself in single target situations, replacing Beidou with that second Hydro unit with Yelan might actually be pretty good. Soup teams are always pretty good just because transformative reactions are really good. I don't think she's gonna be as good as other Hydro units on them though. Is there anything else? I think that's it. So now let's give like a verdict on what I think about it. I think VV Vape teams should be good, obviously. I'm not like 100% sure how the Pyro app is gonna work. I'm a little bit worried, but mostly optimistic, I would say. Hutao double Hydro, very obviously good. Hutao Xingqiu is a core that already works and already like kind of suffers from not having other good units to put with. And then you're basically using 2 slots just for an animal unit. You're forced to get another Pyro unit just to apply Pyro to get that swirl. And so you're basically using a Pyro unit that doesn't do anything. Which means that even though generally Hutao VV Vape teams perform the best, there's definitely a place for new units to come out that synergize well with Hutao and take that place instead of the VV Vape, where you would have just double Hydro either with like Fischl maybe, to get some over vapes on your Hutao, with Zhongli to just increase all of your team's damage, with Kazuha to increase the Hydro unit's damage, with Xiangling if it's enough Hydro for the both of them, which I don't know if it will. It does seem like it could be a pretty good core for like to use the 3 of them together. Pyro Vape carry is just like the other ones. It's gonna be because most of the other Pyro carries are just not that great. So she's gonna work with there, but it's probably not gonna be great teams. National, I'm gonna say fine as well, because I don't think she's actually gonna be better than Xingqiu. Maybe that's just me underestimating her here, but it doesn't look like she provides more than Xingqiu would on this team, right? She's gonna struggle more than Xingqiu to keep the Hydro, and she's not gonna have that like E nuke, right? Her E doesn't seem to do as much damage as Xingqiu's. But I think that the bigger problem comes from you don't really want to stay on Xiangling for National. And if you're not staying on Xiangling, you're not getting Yelan's like buff to on-field units because it doesn't snapshot. We'll see how it goes. Maybe the buff is good enough to justify just running on-field Xiangling, but I'm not too optimistic about it. I would probably still rather run Xingqiu there. Freeze teams, I think they're going to be pretty good. I like Xingqiu in freeze teams a lot. She's going to be similar to Xingqiu in freeze teams. Slightly slower Hydro up doesn't really make much of a difference. What will make a difference is the fact that she doesn't have her orbitals, which means that she can only really freeze in single target rather than in AoE. If you pair her with an animal unit that can get a Hydro infusion on their burst, so like Kazuha, Hydro infused burst, something like that, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. I think she's going to be good in freeze teams, but definitely not better than the other options. I'm gonna change these to great because that's probably gonna be her best. Mono Hydro, it's fine. I've seen a few calcs on Mono Hydro that were actually a bit better than I was expecting it to be. Or not Mono Hydro, but I don't know what to call it. Like double Hydro, double Geo. Wet Rock, oh no. All right, sure. Wet Rock, cool. Let's call it Wet Rock. I don't really like Mono Hydro because if you're putting both Xingqiu and Yelan on your team, bro, please get a Pyro unit in there. Please have someone take advantage of that. God. It's probably gonna be fine, but like a bit of a waste of units in my opinion. Taser teams, good but hard. Because if you play her without a healer, unlike Xingqiu, she doesn't actually provide additional damage reduction and healing, which means it kind of forces you into a team with a healer or to just never get hit. Xingqiu's healing may not be good, like may not be very, very large, but it prevents you from getting slowly but surely killed by just taking chip damage every now and then. If you don't have Xingqiu, you don't have any healing at all, so your damage you take is permanent. Cookie Shinobu, don't run Cookie. I think there's 2 teams where the like damage reduction and healing that Xingqiu provides, like you're gonna feel that it's gone if you use Yelan. I think on a Hutao VV Vape, because you want to stay under 50% HP on Hutao, and like min-max Hutao builds don't have that much HP, and losing that damage reduction can actually make a bigger difference. And then on top of that, Hutao has the charge attack for high DPS. If you charge attack, you use your stamina, and that means you have less stamina to dodge. That's one of the teams where it's going to be like felt. The other one is probably going to be in Taser teams, where you just don't have a healer most of the time. And if you do have a healer, it's probably a Hydro unit. And if you already have a Hydro unit, Yelan isn't necessary. Now finally, Soup teams, good but dank, which is basically what Soup teams always are. Soup as a concept is kind of just broken because even if your units aren't good, As long as you have enough elemental app from all of the elements, you'll deal transformative damage, and that's cool. Now, obviously, she's not out yet. Everything is still subject to change. If you're wondering whether you should pull for her, wait until like at least a week after her banner's out so that people have a good idea of her if you're considering pulling her for meta reasons. That being said, I would expect her to be pretty good. It doesn't look like she's gonna really do anything that Xingqiu can't do, so she's definitely not in need. But if you have two teams that would want Xingqiu, which is pretty often, she can definitely be a good pull. If you already have a 5-star Hydro though, it's very possible you're not gonna need her.